Welcome to Euractiv's Tech Brief podcast. My name is Luca Bertuzzi, your technology editor. This week, we take a closer look at the Sanders Pay debate. For an overview on all things technology in the EU, sign up to our free newsletter or visit the website euractiv.com. This is Euractiv's Tech Brief podcast. Today, I'm joined by Julia Maxwell, Senior Vice President for Regulatory and Public Affairs at Viaplay Group and member of the EU VOD Coalition, and Alessandro Gropelli, Deputy Director General and Director of Strategy and Communications at ETNO. Hello, both.
Good afternoon.
Good morning.
So we are here to discuss these contentions, fair play or network fee or Sanders Pay, however you want to call it. This is for those who, as a reminder, this initiative was introduced for the first time last May by Internal Market Commissioner Breton. And since then, quite a lot has changed. We have seen MEPs, EU governments taking sides, the body of European telecom regulators, BEREC, also issued an opinion that was quite negative concerning the idea. And now the Commission published public consultation on this topic. So, Alessandro, what is your view on the direction the discussion has taken so far?
Thank you, Luca, for this. I think that a public debate is always healthy, and especially a debate on this topic, because what we are discussing essentially is how do we get to full 5G and full fiber everywhere in Europe. I think during the debate, civil society brought up important points like do not touch the net neutrality principles. We agree. Consumers reminded us that we should not impact the prices. And we also agree. And actually, we think that fair share will help relieve the phone bills as being the only way in which you fund network upgrades. And also, I find it very interesting that there has been a general realization that we need more investment in 5G and fiber. This said, unfortunately, there has also been some misinformation and astroturfing going around. But as I said, with the consultation coming out, good news, everybody will be able to express their views, and we need a healthy debate on this important topic.
Yeah, and turning the question to you, Julia, and also I have to say that I have to thank you in particular for joining the podcast, because I have to say it was quite challenging to find someone to speak out publicly on the other side of the fence. So what is your view on how the discussion has been developing so far?
Yeah, well, thank you, Luca. It's great to be here today. It's great to be representing the European VOD Coalition. We bring together video on demand and digital entertainment companies that share common values and invest in and distribute audiovisual content in Europe as our core commercial activities. I'm surprised. I think we've heard a lot of people sharing our perspective, but I'm very happy to be able to speak to that today. I think before commenting on the specific discussion, I'd like to mention a few background points. Firstly, the proposals surfacing under the umbrella of fair share are not new. They've been discussed and discarded in the past. And at the moment, we haven't seen any facts that warrant a change in policy, although obviously this new consultation will be helpful in that respect. I think we really want to underline that this is not just a discussion about big tech versus big telco. We have often been told that smaller sort of streaming companies like my own, like Viaplay, we're a European streaming service, are not the target of this proposal. But I think our concern is that we would all be hit as a consequence. So coming specifically to the ongoing discussion, we welcome the fact that the European Commission is going to undertake this public consultation to gather facts and data about this topic. We are, however, concerned that the drafting of the leaked questionnaire that we have seen seems to presume that a problem exists. And we're worried that this might lead to incorrect assumptions and conclusions, and question whether these are perhaps based on some incorrect assumptions and conclusions. We'd have really liked to see questions that get to the core of whether an investment gap exists, an approach that really demonstrates an understanding of the dynamics and complexity of internet traffic. And we feel that the current questionnaire doesn't give room for this at the moment. And given that a fact-based problem definition has not yet been established, we believe it is important to explore all possible options to address a potential problem rather than focusing in on internet traffic fee or levy, which would be particularly detrimental to video-on-demand services such as our own and the creative industries that rely on us to distribute their content.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. And just to clarify that those that deflected from engaging in this discussion were not on-demand platforms; they were tech companies. So, Alessandro, this thing that Julia mentioned is quite key. I think this idea of who will be affected by the Senders Pay initiative. In the questionnaire, we have seen that the Commission is asking the telcos to propose a threshold to identify large traffic generators. Do you already have an idea of what this threshold should look like?
First of all, I think that the idea of a threshold floated in the questionnaire already responds to Julia's worry of whether the small ones will be captured. And I think that the idea of having a threshold is good and solid. It has clear precedent in recent legislation. I'm thinking of the DSA and of the DMA, where the purpose is to rebalance a bit relationships where you have these tech giants and you need to ensure that there is a good environment out there also for the smaller guys. But let me use an analogy on the threshold. If we think of internet as an highway, to me and to the telecoms community, the problem clearly does not come from the individual cars. It also does not come from the small and medium-sized enterprises with their vans. It also does not come from broadcasters, and it does not come from content creators. Where the problem comes from is a very small group of big truck companies who are concentrated, very well organized, and they move together. And when they move, you have an issue. And this means that there is heavy traffic on the road and that they create trouble. This is what the threshold can capture. And if you put it into numbers, how it can be defined. As ETNO, at this point in time, we do not have a specific percentage to put on this threshold. We will, of course, prepare to respond now to the public consultation, and there maybe we will be more detailed.
And Julia, turning this question to you now, what would be an acceptable threshold for the VOD coalition?
I think we are concerned about the possibility of identifying a threshold because, following the logic just described, we think it would depend not only on company revenues, but traffic levels, which are ultimately dependent on member state, time of day, location, and we would see a very different picture in each member state. And besides that, we like to take a step back and acknowledge that internet traffic as a metric is inadvisable as a matter of policy. Such charges will not only create distortions in the online services market, but pose multiple practical and legal challenges. We've seen stakeholders such as BEREC already indicate that traffic does not correlate with profit or raising costs for ISPs. Understanding the dynamics and complexity of internet traffic, the role of different actors, geographies, technical specificities, we believe is key. And I can give you a few examples. Internet traffic does not always correlate to revenues. Many internet-based businesses generate large revenues, but a small traffic footprint. If you look at e-commerce or stock trading companies as examples, they're hugely popular, benefit enormously from telco infrastructure, and vice versa. There are content application providers with relatively small revenues, but do generate sizable traffic. I think I'd like to use an example from my company. We are, as I said, a European streaming company. We're headquartered in Stockholm. And over the last few years, we've been on an ambitious expansion. strategy, and we've been launching it in new European markets. And last year we launched, almost a year ago, in fact, in the Netherlands. And we have, amongst our original European content, our Nordic content, we have some premium sports rights, and that includes the Formula One. Now, we've attracted a lot of subscribers by virtue of the fact that the Netherlands have an extremely talented young man called Max Verstappen, who's doing extremely well in the Formula One. Now, when we are streaming the Formula One Grand Prix in the Netherlands, say it's a Saturday afternoon, we attract a lot of subscribers and customers logging on. My concern is what sort of picture that would paint, dependent on thresholds and metrics, whether that would capture us and require us to sort of pay additional fees, despite the fact that we have already paid for the content and that we've paid to optimize delivery and reduce pressure on the the infrastructure by using CDNs. So that's a sort of example of our concerns around using the idea of thresholds and our concerns on the metrics.
I think that's a good point. Alessandro, would you like to react to that? So business model does not correlate to the traffic generated does not correlate to the business model and the profits. Also, if you take, Google, for example, has a very lucrative advertising business, but perhaps I'm not sure of the figures, but I'm sure Netflix generates much less revenues based on the traffic.
I have maybe 3 reactions to this. We know well that data traffic does not correlate to more revenues because telcos tend to have flat fees for their phone bills, internet bills. So the more you use, the same you pay. And this is one of the issues that we have today as telecom sector, that the demand in terms of increasing investment is going up and up and up, but the increase in traffic is not monetized by telecom companies, but it is monetized by those that have data-based business models, like search companies or social networking companies that basically exploit personal data of European citizens and make money on top of it according to the rules that are existing. The second thing that I would like to say is that ETNO will not be arguing for content providers and broadcasters and companies like Viaplay to be captured simply because at an aggregated level, when we speak to our members, the problem does not come from them. So you should not expect us to advocate for them to be captured.
Julia, perhaps a follow-up questions to you as well. When it comes to generating traffic, isn't it true that currently there is no incentive for platforms that create traffic to minimize data consumption?
Well, I can only talk from the experience of my company, not necessarily on behalf of the coalition, but by sort of default, we all try to minimize pressure on networks when we're streaming content that particularly around live sports. And of course, all the coalition membership is varied, and some of us have sports, some of us don't. But I can speak from our experience there. It is just part of our business practice. We're not compelled to do so, but we do so as good practice. And I think part of the bigger picture here is that actually we have mutually beneficial arrangements with many, many telcos in many, many markets. My company alone has over 40. And there we have, a sort of mutually beneficial arrangement where we have revenue share models where we provide our content to their customers, where they can package our content along with their own to their customers. And I think derogating from that is going to cause serious concerns.
And building up on that, Alessandro, we have heard, you have also mentioned that civil society organizations have raised the question of how the senders pay initiative would impact the net neutrality principle. And after all, the whole idea of setting a threshold for large traffic generators is a derogation to the principle, because you identify some, allow me the term, some troublemakers in a sense. So On what basis can you justify this derogation? And how can we know that, once you start setting this principle of derogating to the net neutrality, then it won't happen more and more?
Well, first of all, I would like to disagree on the fact that fair share would be a derogation to net neutrality. And there are two main reasons why. The first one is that fair share is not sender's party pay. Fair share is about a small group of tech giants who use a public good that is called the internet in an intensive way, while sender's pay is a general principle that applies to everybody. What we are discussing here, and we just discussed, is a naturally involved threshold or a DMA-like mechanism. This means that we are not precisely speaking about the same thing as a sender party pays. Also, there are three principles: no throttling, no blocking, no discrimination. These are the three pillars of net neutrality. They are law today, and they have also been confirmed by the European Court of Justice. We, as ETNO, have put it black on white. We are not asking to change these three principles. And I also noticed that the Commission in public put black on white that they will not alter these three principles, asking to big tech giants who are in scope to pay for the costs that they generate when they use that public good that is the internet is very different from prioritizing traffic or discriminating it. This is why I think the net neutrality argument is not as valid as some claim.
Turning to you, Julia, the Commission questionnaire put forward two possible options. One is a digital fund, which follows some of the American example, and one is a direct contribution that might have some strings attached. What would be a feasible option for content providers?
Well, before talking about solutions, I think the first question should be to assess what exactly the problem or market failure is and where the funding would go. In Germany, RECO indicates that over 50 billion euros of private funding is available for fibre, and we see private equity investors responding to meet that demand. In France, the fibre plan is expected to connect 100% of homes by 2025 and require 10 billion in public and municipal funding. In the 300 billion figure quoted by ETNO, we have a far greater figure than what we've seen in the data that comes up from the public sector and industry. It really makes the point that there is much more study and analysis needed around yet another part of the equation. Of course, we support the goal of bridging the digital divide. Having access to sufficiently fast and unconstrained internet access service for all is a public interest objective comparable to the provision of basic needs such as roads, electricity, safety, and education. The ability to connect all citizens should be a priority policy goal for any country. Broadband connections are essential, but equally, broadband investments are long-term investments, and the dynamics of internet usage is constantly changing. Targeting a specific subset of internet services for fund contributions, we don't think is a stable source of revenue and risks creating market distortions for online services for all the reasons I've mentioned above. With regards to your reference to the US example, we don't believe you can equate the US debate to the discussion in Europe because the US debate is about universal service and last mile connectivity, whose costs depend on the number of lines and not traffic levels. So we don't see how a solution like the one currently being discussed in the US would solve what the telcos see as the issue here in Europe. There is a difference between the public policy objectives of providing universal connectivity to current generation connectivity technologies as per the current USO, Universal Service Obligation, and ensuring the rollout of future connectivity technologies to uneconomic areas. The funding principles, though, are the same. The least distortive way to ensure funding is through general taxation and not a tax based on traffic usage of certain large content providers to be paid directly to a handful of companies. So all in all, we've yet to see a viable alternative to us, bearing in mind that we also don't see exactly the issue we are trying to solve here.
I would like to make a comment on the investment gap, just to say that Actually, the investment gap calculated by the European Commission is the whole premise to the European Digital Decade targets. So I'm happy to hear that it's also a VOD coalition objective to improve investment in that area. I want also to agree on the fact that the universal service option that the United States are considering as their way to go about fair contribution is not necessarily useful in Europe, because Europe has a problem of private investment, which is 50 to 80% less than the one that they have in the US. We don't have a problem of public investment. Julia mentioned it. There are many funds out there, especially after the recovery fund that we received after the pandemic in various member states.
Moving on, Alessandro, now to what we can actually expect from the Commission at this stage, because there isn't obviously the time to for a legislative proposal before the end of this mandate. At the same time, we heard Breton, who's basically the champion of this initiative, pushing for relaxation of EU merger policies. So basically to let telecom companies consolidate. We are waiting to hear the Commission response on the Orange MásMóvil case, which would be quite significant in terms of market consolidation for the sector. So I have the impression that on the next Commission desk, they will have two options. Introducing these, albeit limited centers pay principle, or letting telecom companies merge. So which of the two would actually be best for the sector?
Thank you, Luca. Well, first of all, I think that there is still a lot that the European Commission can do in the next 1 year. And there is a big political problem and a real life problem here. According to Analysis Mason, if we keep on investing at the current pace, in 2030, there will be 45 million Europeans that do not have 5G and do not have gigabit networks. So this is a problem, and something should still be done now. We cannot wait 5 years to do it. This said, today, telecom operators can rely mainly on one revenue stream for their investment needs, and it is the internet bills. And this is not enough any longer. So I think we need a serious discussion with results on the fair share. And we also need a serious discussion on the market structure in Europe, whether we discuss in-market consolidation or cross-border consolidation. But I also saw in recent statements by Vestager and by Breton that there is an acknowledgement that there is a problem of scale in Europe and of the investment capacity of the sector that goes with that scale. So we need to act and we need to fix things, and we need to do it as soon as possible. We cannot afford being 10 years behind South Korea or the United States.
Turning this question to you now, Julia. Obviously, reaching these connectivity targets is also in the interest of content providers. So what is, in your view, the best solution to reach these targets?
Well, I think just to talk about whether market sort of consolidation is an acceptable option or not for content providers, I think it's not our place to deliberate on telco competition issues. From our industry's perspective, the VOD space is extremely competitive, and competition is a source of innovation and investment. We invest in the best services and content, and we collaborate as well as compete with each other for the benefit of the consumer. What I will say is that our focus is investing in content, which helps drive consumer demand for internet service provision products, and our ability to continue that investment will be curtailed if network fees are introduced, which ultimately will have an effect on the broader market conditions. That being said, to the best of our knowledge, the European Commission has never forbidden cross-country consolidation as long as it respects competition principles and is appropriately assessed on a case-by-case basis.
So to wrap up, I'll give you each 1 minute to summarize your argument in favor or against the Commission initiative. Alessandro, would you like to start?
Thank you, Luca. I think this is about bringing 5G and fiber to all of the 450 million European citizens. And I agree with what was said. It's not a big tech versus European telcos debate. If you represent a company, if you represent a group of citizens, if you represent a public interest, then you need probably resilient broadband networks for your competitiveness. And it means that this debate is important also to you. The consultation is coming up. It's a great opportunity to understand how do we make this happen in the right way and that we protect the European interests in this. My pledge is not to fall into the trap of some big tech lobbies who do not even want to discuss this. So it is in the European interest to have this discussion. Let's have it and let's find the best way to make it happen.
1 minute to you, Julia.
From the perspective of the VOD Coalition, a network traffic tax is a bad idea that would disproportionately harm the European audiovisual sector. This idea is a tax on consumer behaviour that discriminates against online video and high-quality content. If content companies have to pay additional fees to incumbent telcos on top of what we already invest in content production and delivery, we will simply have less to invest in making great new European content. The debate is wrongly being portrayed as a fight between big tech and big telco, with little thought to the collateral damage such measures will have on content producers and ultimately consumer choice and cost.
Alessandro Gropelli is Deputy Director General and Director of Strategy and Communications at ETNO. Julia Maxwell is Senior Vice President for Regulatory and Public Affairs at Viaplay Group and a member of the EU VOD Coalition. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we got time for this week. Don't forget to sign up to our free Tech Brief newsletter to stay on top of tech news and digital policy developments in the EU and beyond. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast published on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music. This episode was produced with the technical help of Avi Chiori. I'm your Luca Bertuzzi, and thank you for listening.